The Carolina Hurricanes are still battling for first place and for playoff position. Zachary Martin of Locked On Hurricanes joins us to discuss that and all things Hurricanes as we head into the final week of the NHL season.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is my pleasure to welcome to the show Zachary Martin of Locked On Hurricanes as we head into the home stretch of the season. And Zachary, it's an outside chance, but the Hurricanes still have a shot at first place. How important would it be for them to nail down that top spot in the Metropolitan?
I mean, it'd be huge because you talk about their fourth straight division title. I know they have that Central Division from like the shortened COVID season and stuff like that, but it'd be huge to go for 3 Metro divisions in a row, you know, kind of just keeping on with the domination of the division that they have. And more importantly, just be able to get the fight for that first seed in the East so you can get that second wild card 2 spot, which is apparently no one really wants to have right now. So yeah, but it'd just be huge just to have like another feather in the cap for the Hurricanes and stuff like that. So yeah, surprisingly they're still in it, even how late it is too. It's just like 2 games left. Technically one if you really think about it because the fact that it's Monday, but yeah, it's great to watch. You always love to have a little bit of a battle like with this many games left, but yeah, it's been a crazy ride so far. For sure.
No question. The Hurricanes were one of the more active teams at the trade deadline, and they seem to really have gelled since that time. Talk to me about the moves they made and the impact that they had for this team down the stretch.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you go out like the night before the trade deadline, you get Jake Guentzel from the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yes, you give up Michael Bunting, who's also been doing well for Pittsburgh as well, so you got to give them credit. It's kind of one of those rare win-win trades for both teams and stuff like that. Of course, they get a lot of prospects, but the Hurricanes getting Jake Guentzel, he was out for the first 2 or 3 games because he was still out with his injury. Comes back, plays on the second line for a couple games, and then once he got paired with Sebastian Aho and Seth Jarvis, that line has been absolutely lights out. I think the last time I checked, they're like 22 or 23 goals for and like 0 against in all categories. Like, it is insane just to see how he's blended in so well with the team. He's already well over 20 points. I think he's like 23 or 24 at this point because he just scored 2 goals on Friday night against the St. Louis Blues. And of course, both empty netters, but he's the first guy in Hurricanes franchise history to score 2 empty netters in the same game. So I think that's pretty good, for a guy like him. And then, getting Kuznetsov is really great too. He's, played really well. He hasn't played for a month when he first played for the Hurricanes. He come in, haven't played in over a month. And then it's just every other day, 14 games in 24 days on like exactly on the deadline. You get that retained. All you send is a draft pick back, and he's been playing really well. And you get him all next year too. It just seems like he's fit in really well, and the team really loves him too. So yeah, getting these 2 guys in is really giving the Hurricanes an extra scoring touch, and just having some playmakers that just elevate your top 6. So honestly, really great additions for the Hurricanes, and they've been playing some lights out hockey since.
And there's been some lights out goaltending as well.
Yeah. Getting Freddie Anderson back definitely helped. I think he's like 9-1-0 since he's been back. It's just crazy how he's been like I think he's got like 2 shutouts or I think like 2 or 3 shutouts since he's been back, and he's just been playing some really great hockey. Yeah. It's like it's not really like a trade acquisition, but the fact that you require him back after missing 40 plus games, comes in as like a sub 1-2 goals against, and then a save percentage in the 940s. Like, you couldn't ask for a better acquisition of getting him back in the lineup, and the fact that they've been rotating him and Peter Kochetkov every other game, it's worked perfectly. Like both goalies are getting some rest, but they're able to still do their jobs. And the Hurricanes have just been really great. They kind of fought their way back into the division title race, and it's just a lot of fun. It's really fun to watch with how these guys are playing, especially with how close we are to the playoffs already, and they're firing on all cylinders.
How do you think Rod Brind'Amour will handle the goaltending come playoff time?
I don't know. It's kind of tough because, like, Gil, like when you come to the playoffs, you kind of want to ride that hot goalie. It's like you don't want to get a guy out of his group because you saw with Sergei Bobrovsky last year for the Panthers. Comes in, has a ridiculous run for them. He didn't get them in the playoffs, but they play him in the playoffs, and all of a sudden he's just like, oh, I know how to play goalie again. And you kind of want to do that, but also at the same time, it's like the rotation seems like it's kind of working. So I guess it really depends on how Rod wants to do it. He might go with the hot goalie, or might he still keep with the rotation? Of course, it could change. You could start with one and then switch to the other if you see that it's kind of working or something like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go with the rotation, but you know how the playoffs go. You could ride the hot goalie too. So I can see it going both ways, maybe a flip-flop at some point. So it just really depends on, I guess, what Rod and his staff see in terms of how they want to work the goalies. Especially depends on who they play in the first round too, because there's like 3 or 4 different teams that you could potentially face.
This is a Hurricanes team that has been good for a number of years now and come up just short in the playoffs. What will it take to get to that next level, to go on a really long playoff run and maybe even win another Stanley Cup?
I would say, like we saw last year, the goaltending was really good. Like Frederik Andersen played some really, great hockey, in the entire playoffs. You look at the Eastern Conference Final alone, like the Hurricanes only lost every game by 1 goal, and you're talking a game that went quadruple overtime in game 1, game 4 was in overtime. So it's like the Hurricanes were pretty much in every single game, and they weren't like really big blowout games. So it's like, as long as the goaltending stays good, then that's what really helps them out. And I think the fact that, the team does have depth scoring up and down the lineup, like everyone on the blue line can score, you can roll out 4 lines. So as long as your depth scoring stays good as it's been, and now for the fact you get a guy like Jake Guentzel, who's really proven in the playoffs, I think it's like somewhere in like the top 3 all time in terms of like points per game in the playoffs and stuff like that. So if you get how Jake Guentzel's been and how Evgeny Kuznetsov's also been in the playoffs, if you get those guys rolling with the rest of your top 6, like with how Seth Jarvis is, Sebastian Aho, and Andrei Svechnikov's been on fire, especially that lacrosse goal against the Boston Bruins. I mean, as long as the big boys are scoring goals and you're still getting that depth scoring as well, and your goaltending still playing the well as it is, if they keep this run that they've been on since basically the start of March, I think that's where you're kind of looking at for the Hurricanes, is just keep making sure your top 6 is scoring, and you're getting that depth scoring as well on top of that.
You talk about depth scoring. Give me, or even just depth, give me a player who may not make headlines around the league, but who, if they play well in the playoffs, the Canes have a really good chance of going on a long run.
Well, if you're not talking one of the big guys in, the big blue liners, I would say probably Stefan Noesen. He has, he's one of those guys. You don't see a lot of bottom 6 guys get power play minutes, but he's one of those guys that can do it because his net front presence is really good. He's always out front. He's always scoring the dirty goals, throwing the body, will get into some fights if need be as well. But he showed in the playoffs last year, and he showed it this season too. Like, if he's rolling, then that's really going to help the team out too. And if you're going to look at someone else, Jordan Martinook last year in round 2 against the Devils absolutely lit him up for like 10 points. Like they were considering him as the Wayne Gretzky of the second round, just because like everything was going in. So I think if you get those 2 guys are still rolling like they are, if you're not talking like the anyone in the top 6, I would watch out for Steph Noesen and Jordan Martinook going into the playoffs.
All right, Zachary, welcome aboard, and thank you so much for doing this. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find the podcast and where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, of course. If you guys want to find the podcast, you can go to LO_Hurricanes on Twitter. If you want to look for me, it's One True Zach. It's Oni True Zach. It's actually spelled out. It's not the number itself. I do have a link tree in my personal bio, so if you can find where to find my articles, because I'm also write about the Carolina Hurricanes for the Hockey Writers, and you can find the Locked On Hurricanes, podcast in terms of just the audio side, or on the YouTube version as well. We are on the road to 1,000 downloads. So we're getting there. So we're on the road to 1,000. But yeah, just find me on the LO_Hurricanes and then One True Zach. And like I said, I got a link tree. You can find wherever you can find the podcast.
All right, Zach, thanks so much.
Thanks, Gil. Appreciate it.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Regardless of where your favorite team is in the current standings, I want to remind you, you can win big playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid, Ovechkin, or McKinnon will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, hockey fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.